Outlander SUV is the world's best-selling plug-in hybrid, and for good reason. Much of its success is down to the fact that it was first in this segment of the market, but Mitsubishi has kept this car popular by continually improving it. That's certainly what the brand has done in creating the much-enhanced 2019 model year version of this car. It's a smarter, quieter and more appealing product. Welcome to the car that's rejuvenated Mitsubishi's sales in Europe, the Outlander PHEV. Launched back in 2014, it was the model that popularised plug-in hybrid technology and is still the best-selling contender of that kind, both in our market and across our continent. Now, partly that's because the Japanese brand has been continually evolving it and did so once again in 2018, deciding to address the need to certify this car to the new WLTP cycle standard by introducing a fresh 2.4-litre petrol engine mated to improved electrical technology, all of which we're going to put to the test. Now, it'll need to be good because this rejuvenated Outlander PHEV competes in a very different market to the one campaigned in by earlier versions of this SUV. For a start, there's now quite a bit more actual and imminent direct segment plug-in competition. But of more concern to the brand has been the scrapping in October 2018 of the UK government's plug-in car grant, which previously subsidised this car's price to the tune of £2,500. It's just as well then that this is the most technically advanced model that Mitsubishi has ever made. To maintain its sales penetration without the aid of that grant, it'll have to be. Over 115,000 Outlander PHEV models have been sold across Europe since 2014, and there have been times when this car has accounted for more than 50% of its brand's total sales, and more than half of all plug-in car sales across the board. Initially, that success was down to the way that Mitsubishi was first to market with this technology, but latterly it's had much to do with the very effective way that the brand has been able to communicate the benefits of PHEV motoring. The company reckons that an average owner with a 20-mile each-way daily commute, who does about 18,000 miles a year, pays company car tax, and is switching from a typical 40-mile-per-gallon diesel SUV, could save themselves up to £5,000 a year by switching into one of these. That's a hard stat to ignore. There are, though, limitations to Mitsubishi's cleverness here. The bulkiness of the mechanicals needed with plug-in hybrid motoring prevents this petrol-electric variant offering the useful third-row seating that you'd get with an Outlander powered by a conventional petrol engine. Now, for the same reason, the PHEV variant's fuel tank is smaller too, which is one of the reasons why this hybrid can't match the total operating range of the conventional model. Easier to address are a couple of the issues we raised the last time we tested this car. The rather vague handling and cabin quality that was previously slightly questionable given the money being asked. We're told that both issues have been dealt with by this revised model, which, as well as that larger engine, also gets a bigger 13.8 kWh battery and greater electrical motor output. These ought to be finishing touches to what was on paper already a very complete product. Time to try it. So, what's it like? Well, if you've driven a hybrid of any kind before, the feeling should be familiar. You press the dash-mounted start button to be greeted by a couple of beeps, and, not much more, assuming that, as here, the battery cells are fully charged. There's a green ready symbol on the hybrid power display gauge that replaces the usual rev counter on the dash, and it designates that you're all set to see what this petrol-electric Outlander has to offer. That hybrid gauge is something you need to learn to use. For eco-friendly driving, you're supposed to keep its needle in the top green eco segment, and it'll also stray into the blue charge section when you brake, designating the creation of electrical energy through regenerative braking. Flex your right foot and the needle will sway right into the power segment. Quiet, isn't it? That's because we're in the all-electric mode, a state of affairs that Mitsubishi claims can be maintained for up to 28 miles if you start off with the batteries full of juice, or up to 35 miles in city driving. In our test, we found the actual figure to be more typically in the very early 20s. That range reading has been certified under the latest, more stringent WLTP World Harmonised Light Vehicle Test Procedure cycle, by the way. Aware that WLTP certification would lead to an inevitable drop in the official efficiency figures that it would be able to quote, Mitsubishi took the opportunity to update this model's plug-in hybrid powertrain to minimise that impact, and has ended up improving it quite a lot. The petrol engine that drives the package has increased in size from 2 litres to 2.4 litres and adopts the brand's latest MIVEC variable valve timing. This improved power plant is gutsier, putting out 135 PS, and cleverer too, apparently able to switch as appropriate between the Otto cycle, which maximises power and torque, and the Atkinson cycle, which burns less fuel under lighter loads. As before, this main engine is assisted by electric motors at the front and at the rear, so creating this PHEV variant's own particular four-wheel drive setup. With this revised model, the motor at the front still puts out 82 PS, but the one at the rear is now 10% more powerful than before, developing 95 PS. The rear one needs to develop a bit more because it has to power the rear wheels on its own without any help from the 2.4 litre petrol engine. If you're wondering what all those figures amount to, we have to point out that you can't arrive at this car's total power output by simply adding all these stats together. But in rough terms, it ought to perform at a level comparable with a conventional petrol power plant developing around 200 PS. Or at least it would if it wasn't so heavy. All the various changes have added 20 kilograms to this Outlander PHEV model's curb weight, meaning that it tips the scales at nearly 1.9 tonnes. To give you some segment perspective on that, a conventional diesel-powered rival like a Audi Q5 is around 110 kilograms lighter. To compensate for this, Mitsubishi's engineers decided to make the drive battery bigger too. It's now got 15% more capacity and develops 10% more power, having been increased in size from 12 kWh to 13.8 kWh. The extra cells do take slightly longer to charge though. Think in terms of needing around 5 hours from a normal household socket. In addition, the electric generator output has increased by 10%, all of this working through an upgraded PHEV operating system. Rest to 62 miles an hour now occupies 10.5 seconds. That's half a second faster than the previous model could manage, on the way to an academic top speed of 106 miles an hour. More relevant, perhaps, is the news that all the various driveline changes have boosted the all-electric top speed to 84 miles an hour, though if you get anywhere near that on a regular basis in this car, your battery charge will dwindle very quickly indeed. So, the technology's been upgraded, but then there wasn't really much wrong with that to begin with. In improving this car, Mitsubishi was very aware that the driving experience on offer here also needed to be enhanced if this Outlander was to be more effective in generating conquest sales from more conventional rivals. Earlier versions of this car lumbered through the turns and could feel rather lethargic in the mid-range. Plus, they tended to rather crash over the bumps and offered up all the steering feel of a 90s PlayStation. Hence, this improved model's recalibrated suspension and a body shell that, thanks to a new structural adhesive welding process, is now more rigid. There are also now larger vented brake discs for improved feel and stopping power. New grippier tyres feature. There's been a switch from Toyo to Yokohama, and great efforts have been made to improve cabin refinement too. There's also now a selectable Sport mode, which gives quicker throttle response, sharper feel through the now quicker reacting steering rack, and more grip via the Super all-wheel control system that this car has adopted from its smaller Eclipse Cross SUV model stablemate. This four-wheel drive setup includes a selectable Snow mode to improve low grip launches and cornering traction on slippery tarmac. Lots of changes then. Have they had an effect? To some extent, yes. If you've driven earlier versions of this car, the quicker steering is probably the first thing that you'll notice about this revised model, making this Outlander easier to thread along narrower roads. And it's certainly slightly quieter, making longer distance highway cruising a touch more pleasant. I'm not quite as convinced by the changes to the suspension, which still rather struggles across poorer sections of our nation's terrible tarmac and contributes to the prodigious level of body roll that you get should you attempt to take tighter turns at any sort of rapid speed. Talking of speed, if you floor the throttle, those beefed up electric motors and the larger engine do together deliver slightly more responsive acceleration than before, but there's still less forward motion than the amount of engine noise generated would suggest that you're going to get. It's a bit like the kind of feel that you'd get from a car featuring one of those belt-driven CVT auto gearboxes. This Outlander doesn't use this kind of setup. It has a fixed gear auto transmission provided by GKN that drives power to the wheels and works with a hydraulic clutch to modulate the torque developed by those two electric motors. It's a smooth enough package that eases seamlessly between the various ratios, provided that you're happy to cruise along with the kind of relaxed, laid-back gait that suits this Mitsubishi best. Otherwise, this car feels very similar to the way that it always did, and the powertrain works via the same three so-called intelligent motion driving mode settings that this Outlander PHEV has always offered. The first of these, EV Priority Mode, is one in which there's no engine input and the front and rear electric motors move the car using only stored electricity from the drive battery. In this setting, you can theoretically travel up to that all-electric 84 mile-an-hour top speed that I mentioned earlier. Should the need arise for sudden acceleration or the battery charge have run down, the car will seamlessly switch to its second, Series Hybrid mode. Here, the petrol engine chimes in, not to drive the car, but to act as a generator supplying power to the electric motors. If that's still not quite enough for either the performance or the driving range you need, your Outlander will finally, almost reluctantly, automatically switch to its third, Parallel Hybrid mode, which adds the resources of the petrol engine driving the front wheels. Even here, though, you can be replenishing the battery's charge for future use by maximising the amount of regenerative braking energy that the car can harvest when you slow it down. Pushing this auto gear lever into its right-hand B setting is one way of doing this, but you can be more proactive about it by using the paddles behind the steering wheel. Now, initially, you assume, wrongly, that these are for flipping up and down the auto gearbox. What they're actually there for is to allow you to either increase or decrease the regenerative braking effect. Dial it up, and you'll find that a lot of the time the car will slow itself without the need for you to brake at all. It's all part of a different kind of driving technique that you have to learn with this Mitsubishi, but which, once mastered, quickly becomes second nature. Of course, that won't suit everyone. Those likely to be regularly covering long distances might be better off choosing the much cheaper conventional petrol-powered Outlander model. That ordinary 150 PS 2-litre petrol variant will also be a better bet if you're planning to regularly use your Outlander for towing purposes. Now, this PHEV model can tow no more than 1.5 tonnes, enough only for a small to medium-sized caravan. With the conventional petrol version, this figure rises to 2 tonnes, enough to allow you to tug along something a little more substantial. An ordinary petrol-powered Outlander would have an advantage in off-road conditions too, though to be fair, the PHEV version also gives a good account of itself here, actually providing a slightly better 22.5 degree departure angle than its stablemate. The ordinary petrol model has a slightly better ramp breakover angle capability at 21 degrees, and both variants feature the same 21 degree approach angle. To be honest, we wouldn't advise you to regularly put any of this to the test. Though wheel articulation is pretty good, there's no hill descent control to help you out on slippery slopes, and in all its guises this car is somewhat limited by its relatively modest 190mm ride height. Still, if you should get your Outlander stranded somewhere you really oughtn't to have ventured with it in the first place, you'll be glad of the four-wheel drive lock mode that all variants provide. Here, the electronically operated clutch pack splits drive 50-50 between the front and the rear axles to deliver all the grip you're going to get. But of course, it's much more relevant to talk about this car's capability on tarmac. If you never charge the thing up, and plug-in hybrid detractors often suggest that typical owners very often don't, then to be frank, the petrol-electric version of this car doesn't really add up. But if you change your motoring regime, connect up whenever possible, and exercise everything that this car can offer, then it really does make an awful lot of sense. This isn't an SUV you'd buy to make a driveway statement, but in its own way, it's a smartly functional bit of automotive technology. As for the changes made as part of the 2019 model year update to this third generation Outlander design, well, they're relatively minor. Mitsubishi did, after all, make far-reaching aesthetic improvements to this car in 2016. Nevertheless, the company hasn't been able to resist further tinkering with what it calls its dynamic shield design direction, though you'd probably have to be either a previous owner or a brand enthusiast to notice the changes. The key updates apply here at the front, which gets a redesigned grille, this restyled bumper extension and smarter fog lamp bezels. Plusher models like this one that feature full LED headlights get them with a more stylish so-called technical look finish, and the lamps themselves feature auto levelling. There are small changes at the rear too, this large roof spoiler and another redesigned bumper extension. Otherwise things are much as before, with LED tail lamps and this shark fin style roof antenna to add a smart finishing touch. The exhaust is subtly hidden away. Move to the side, and the high flanks, the raised beltline, the uncluttered surfaces and the strong shouldering that have always defined this model remain as before. Only these restyled 18-inch wheels have been altered as part of the package of updates we're evaluating here. We continue to be impressed with the way that the styling artfully disguises the size of this design. It's actually about the same length as a Kia Sorento SUV, an apparently much larger car. Time to take a seat behind the wheel. Now, Mitsubishi upgraded the cabin of this car quite a bit as part of changes made to this model back in 2016, which hasn't left much scope for many further changes that could be made to this 2019 model year car without a complete cabin redesign. This improved model does get a restyled instrument cluster, and the front seats have been recontoured to give more lateral cornering support. Otherwise, it's much as you were, which means we're left with a cabin that, with the volume trim levels, doesn't really have the class and quality of an equivalently priced diesel-powered German premium brand SUV rival. But, of course, you're getting a lot more technology in compensation. And plusher variants like this one do try and lift things a bit with things like padded door panels and this silver carbon trim on the doors and around the centre console. The brand has standardised its SDA smartphone link display audio system, which gives you a 7-inch high-definition centre dashboard colour infotainment screen framed in a gloss black panel above the climate control switchgear. From here you access the usual navigation, DAB audio, media and Bluetooth phone features. Plus on the PHEV version there's a wide range of eco driving support data. This setup's monitor looks a little small by modern standards and no longer has the physical volume and map scale knobs that it used to have, making it sleeker looking but ultimately less usable. Mitsubishi also fits the same SDA package to its smaller Eclipse Cross SUV, but there mates it to a rather fiddly lower touchpad. Here you're limited to voice activation or touchscreen functionality. As standard, this SDA setup includes Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring functionality, something you may find yourself using quite a lot because navigation isn't included as part of any of the trim levels, even the really expensive ones. That approach won't play well with potential buyers who want to keep a cap on data usage or who habitually drive in areas with a poor network signal. This PHEV model doesn't really need a conventional auto gear lever, but Mitsubishi has provided this silver-trimmed stick anyway in the interests of familiarity. Earlier I mentioned the redesigned instrument binnacle you view through this 3-spoke leather-stitched steering wheel. Well, here there are two big dials. The left-hand one a hybrid power display gauge that replaces the usual rev counter on the dash. The dials are separated by bar graphs showing your remaining fuel and battery charge, above which you can scroll through displays that brief you on the percentage of all-electric driving that you've done and give you trip computer data. There's also an at-a-glance version of the fascinating energy flow meter that you'll more sophisticatedly find displayed on the centre dash screen, showing what's being charged by what. What else? Well, I mentioned that the seats are now more supportive. They're trimmed on entry-level versions with a durable material called C-Tech that stays warm in winter and cool in summer by reflecting UV rays. If you stretched beyond base Duro spec, you get this smart leather trim with even softer Napa leather upholstery featuring at the very top of the range. Less impressive is storage provision around the cabin. Really, Mitsubishi has done pretty much the minimum here. That means 2 cup holders ahead of the gear stick and the usual centre storage box between the seats, though unfortunately it doesn't have any media attachment points inside it. The glove box and the door bins aren't especially big, and neither is this tiny coin cubby at the base of the centre stack. Still, now that Mitsubishi doesn't offer a sunroof in this car, there is at least no problem in providing a roof-mounted compartment for your sunglasses. Time to take a seat in the second row. And it's here that you'll notice the difference between a D-segment SUV like this one and smaller C-segment Qashqai class SUVs, many of which retail for much the same sort of money. To give you just one example, an Outlander is 261mm longer than a Qashqai, and that's a difference that really has to tell when it comes to rear seat space. As indeed it does. There's reasonable space back here for 2 adults, or 3 at a squash, with the third person's cause aided by the way that the central transmission tunnel has been kept usefully low. Just above, this model now gets twin vents, a surprising omission from previous versions. On this PHEV derivative, you can't slide this back bench forward and backwards in the way that you can on the alternative petrol variant. That's because of the battery pack situated beneath the seat. What else? Well, there's a centre armrest with cup holders, small but deep door pockets with bottle holders, small cubbies in the door pulls and seat back pockets. Plus you get this central USB port. And these seat backs recline for greater comfort on longer journeys. Finally, let's take a look at the luggage space out back. A little disappointingly, you get a one-piece tailgate rather than the split folding affair found on the old pre-2013 second-generation Outlander model, perhaps because Mitsubishi wanted to follow the current fashion of providing power operation, which is standard, provided you avoid entry-level trim. It's a pity, though, that it works with arthritic slowness. Anyway, once the tailgate's raised, you'll find revealed a luggage space that with a conventional petrol model would necessarily be very small if all 3 seating rows were to be in use, just 128 litres. Here in this 5-seat only PHEV version, there's 731 litres of space. That's only 50 litres less than you get in the ordinary petrol version with the luggage area chairs folded. Rather curiously here, the cup holders from the ordinary petrol model's 3rd-row seating are retained on the right, along with a narrow storage tray on the left. There are no bag hooks, but you do get 4 tie-down points and a 12-volt socket. There are lower storage areas on each side, a right-hand storage compartment built into the cargo area sidewall, and further storage space beneath the floor, which is where you'll find the tyre repair kit. Unfortunately, no space-saver spare wheel is offered. If you need more space, then folding the 2nd-row backrest frees up 1.85 metres of floor length. Unfortunately, you can't extend that with the kind of fold-flat front passenger seat that some rivals offer. Still, the space provided here is likely to be sufficient for the needs of most owners. If you were to load up to the headlining, you'd have up to 1,472 litres of space in this PHEV variant. That's pretty close to the 1,608 litre total that you'd get from the conventional petrol model. The majority of Outlander customers opt for the PHEV petrol-electric plug-in hybrid model we've been trying here, and for that you're going to need a healthy budget in the £37,000 to £46,000 bracket, figures no longer assisted by a government grant. Such is the price of technology. It might also be worth mentioning that Mitsubishi also offers a commercial van version of this hybrid model, which might attract the attention of particularly green-minded businesses. This PHEV variant has trim levels that start with the base Duro variant, with the next step being 4H, and then the 4HS version, which is what we have here. If you want plusher options with an Outlander PHEV, then your dealer will point you towards the luxurious 5H and 5HS derivatives at the top of the range. Let's move on to consider how this Outlander PHEV model sits in its market and what the competing alternatives might be. Start to analyse that and you begin to quickly realise that this is a car still surprisingly short of direct competition. Both Toyota's RAV4 and Honda's CR-V are both available in hybrid form, but not as plug-in hybrids. Despite that, neither will save you much over this Outlander. What else in the family SUV segment can be plugged in for that all-important commuting distance level of milk float mobility? Well, there's the Kia Niro plug-in, which will save you around £6,000 over a base version of this Outlander PHEV, but that's because it's a smaller size of car. Restrict your search to more comparable SUV D-segment plug-in models, and at the time of this revised Outlander PHEV's launch in mid-2018, the only other alternative was Volvo's XC60 T8, the cheapest version of which will cost you around £17,000 more than this Mitsubishi. Of course, if as an Outlander PHEV buyer, you're prepared to widen your search to include a diesel-powered car of this kind, there are a huge number of potential D-segment SUV alternatives. When the now abolished government plug-in car grant was in place to reduce this Mitsubishi's price by £2,500, the most similarly priced direct diesel competitors tended to be volume brand models, like higher spec versions of the Ford Edge and the Renault Koleos. Now that grant has been removed and this Outlander PHEV sits in the higher £37,000 to £46,000 price bracket I mentioned earlier, the direct similarly priced diesel alternatives are premium brand models in this class. Desirable contenders like BMW's X3, Audi's Q5, Volvo's XC60 and the Mercedes GLC. Unless you've really bought into the advantages of plug-in hybrid technology, you're going to find it hard to pick this car over alternatives of that sort. But of course, most Outlander PHEV buyers are fully signed up to the advantages of plug-in hybrid power and the running cost and tax savings it will bring them. If any of these people are looking for an alternative plug-in model to a petrol-electric Outlander, then they'll be more likely to be seeking it outside the SUV segment, where there's a much greater choice. You could save £4,000 to £5,000 over the cost of this Mitsubishi by going for, say, a Toyota Prius plug-in or a Volkswagen Golf GTE, or up to around £9,000 by choosing a Hyundai Ioniq plug-in. But all of these are smaller family hatchback models, as is the Audi A3 Sportback e-tron model that would cost about the same as a base version of this Mitsubishi. We think a more comparable alternative choice would be something like one of Volvo's V60 estate T6 or T8 twin-engine plug-in hybrid models. But for one of those, you're going to need a budget that would take you towards the upper end of the Outlander PHEV range. Enough with the alternatives. The short story here is that there aren't many rivals that properly replicate what this car can offer for the prices Mitsubishi is asking here. If you've come to that conclusion, then the deal might be sealed for you by a perusal of this Outlander's generous levels of standard spec. So let's take a look at that. Even with base Duro trim, this car comes very well equipped. At this level, you get 18-inch alloy wheels, roof rails, rear privacy glass, power folding mirrors, front fog lamps, headlamp washers, auto headlamps and wipers, and a Thatcham Category 1 alarm. Unfortunately, though, there's no standard spare wheel, an omission we disapprove of on any kind of SUV. Instead, you're stuck with a fiddly tyre repair inflation kit. Standard interior features across the range include air conditioning with dual-zone climate control, an auto-dimming rear-view mirror, cruise control, a heated windscreen, heated front seats, Bluetooth phone connectivity, and leather for the steering wheel and the gear stick. Rear parking sensors are missing at this level, but you do get a reversing camera. Infotainment is covered off by the brand's SDA smartphone link display audio system, which gives you a 7-inch high-definition centre dashboard colour infotainment screen with Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, smartphone mirroring and a DAB radio. If you want more, then 4-level spec delivers black leather seats and full LED headlamps with auto levelling. There's no longer the sunroof that used to be offered with this level of trim, but a 360-degree surround view camera is included, as is keyless entry, a powered tailgate, and various camera-driven safety features that we'll cover off in a moment. As we said earlier, there are options beyond 4-level spec with this PHEV model. More camera-driven safety stuff comes fitted to the 4HS variant that we're trying here, which also adds in a heated steering wheel, adaptive cruise control, front and rear parking sensors, and, via a provided smartphone app, the ability to remotely charge this Mitsubishi and remotely cool or heat its cabin via an included electric heater. Moving even further up the range, a 5H model gives you premium Napa leather upholstery, a premium Alpine sound system, seat heating front and rear, an 8-way electrically adjustable powered driver's seat, front and rear mood lighting, and a premium colour-coded mat set. Finally, if you want all of that, plus all of Mitsubishi's available camera-driven safety features, there's a flagship 5HS level of spec that provides it. On to extra cost accessories and options. One striking omission on the plushiest versions of this car is the lack of satellite navigation. Now, it's all very well for Mitsubishi to point out that the Apple CarPlay Android Auto system means that owners can access navigation through their smartphones, but that won't help you if you need to find somewhere and you're in the country without much of a phone signal. It won't do anything for your phone carrier data charges either. On Duro or 4-level models, you can add in an infotainment package from the options list that will give you TomTom navigation, but it's expensive and something you shouldn't have to pay extra for on a car of this price. As for other accessories, well, metallic or pearlescent paint is optional across the range. We've got white pearl here, And there's a range of different 18-inch alloy wheel designs. And you could look at a chrome pack, which adds that finish to the door mirrors, the door handles and the tailgate. The door mirrors can, as a separate option, be finished not only in chrome but also in carbon, silver or brushed alloy. And you can have the tailgate garnished in either silver or chrome. You can add an Outlander emblem in black or chrome to the bonnet. Front, side or rear air dams can be fitted if you think that would add a sporty touch. An illumination pack gives you a useful charge point lamp plus LED number plate lights and extra LED cabin illumination. There's a separate LED interior light kit, or you can specify floor illumination in cool blue, or go for a package that'll give you mood and puddle lighting in the same colour. Integrated styling steps are optional too, as are front and rear side window deflectors. You might want to look at the Alpine audio system upgrade too. As for practical stuff, well, there's a range of tow bars, of course. There are various optional roof carriers and various bike carriers too, both for the roof and the rear. For the roof, you can also add a useful luggage carrier basket. There are roof carriers for skis and snowboards, and a roof carrier protection set can be ordered too. You can add side protection mouldings to guard against parking knocks, and a bonnet guard can protect from stone chips. Plus, entry guards can protect the door sills too. These also available in smarter stainless steel. A rear side window sunblind might be useful if you have kids. For the cargo area, there's a bumper protection plate and a luggage partition box for storage of smaller items. A dog pack contains a dog guard and a boot tray. A protection pack gives you front and rear mud flaps, textile floor mats, a boot tray, front and rear door sill protection and rear bumper protectors, all features that are also available separately. You can also add in front and rear parking sensors if the model you've gone for doesn't have them. And Mitsubishi offers a branded all-weather car cover. Enough with standard spec and options. Let's move on to consider safety. Most of what you'd expect to find is included. Mitsubishi is especially proud of its RISE, or Reinforced Impact Safety Evolution system, which aims to disperse energy loads during side and rear crashes and controls distortion, enhances occupant protection and also helps to protect the fuel system in the event of a rear impact. In addition, there's all the more conventional stuff too. So every variant gets ISOFIX child seat fastenings, a pedestrian-friendly front bonnet, and bumper and twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus a driver's knee bag. There's also all the expected electronic assistance too, stability control, hill start assist to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, and a very effective MASTC setup, the Mitsubishi Active Stability and Traction Control System. Plus, if you stamp on the anti-lock brakes in an emergency, activating the standard brake assist system, the hazard warning lights are automatically activated to warn following motorists. It all helps to explain this car's 5-star Euro NCAP rating in independent tests, in which this car achieved a perfect 100% score in the active safety category. If you can afford to progress from base Duro spec to a 4-level model, you'll also get blind spot warning, which will alert you if you're about to pull out when there's another vehicle in your blind spot. It's a bit disappointing, given the price of this car, that there's no kind of autonomous braking system supplied on the mainstream models. Mitsubishi does offer that kind of setup, but you have to stretch right towards the top of the range to get it, to the 4HS and 5HS models that we mentioned earlier, the S part of the badge moniker standing for safety. These variants include the choicest elements of Mitsubishi's latest camera and radar-driven safety technology. We'll start with autonomous braking, since we just mentioned it. The brand calls its setup forward collision mitigation with pedestrian detection. As usual with these kinds of systems, this one scans the road ahead as you drive at urban speeds, looking for potential accident hazards. If one is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond or aren't able to, then braking will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. The 4HS and 5HS variants also include two further safety features. One is pretty familiar on modern cars, a lane departure warning system that can stop you from drifting out of your lane on the highway. The other, though, you're less likely to have come across: Mitsubishi's unintended acceleration mitigation system. This detects cars parked to your front or rear when you're starting up and, if necessary, will actually automatically brake the car to prevent accidents that might otherwise have been caused by unintended acceleration. Neat. If you've decided to buy an Outlander PHEV, then it's likely that you'll have been attracted to this car by a pretty compelling set of stats. As before, there's no vehicle excise duty or London congestion charge to pay, and company drivers could potentially save a fortune when it comes to benefit-in-kind tax. More on that in a minute. We'll begin, though, with this petrol-electric model's eye-catching fuel and emissions figures, stats that still make great reading with this revised model. Thanks to the more sophisticated drivetrain that we've described in detail elsewhere in this film, the recertification of this car under the more stringent WLTP World Harmonised Light Vehicle Test Procedure cycle hasn't affected this model's efficiency readings too significantly. Combined cycle fuel economy is WLTP rated at 139 miles per gallon, while CO2 emissions are WLTP rated at 46 grams per kilometre. If you're comparing these stats against those of rival plug-in models, make sure that the figures you're using for competitors aren't those of the old, less realistic NEDC cycle. Of course, no testing cycle procedure is ever going to be truly realistic when it comes to accurately rating the likely returns you'd actually get in real-world motoring at the wheel of a plug-in hybrid model of this kind. To explain the difficulty, let's take two wildly divergent scenarios. In the first, you're nipping down to the nearby shops in no hurry, the hybrid system topped up with battery charge for full electric mobility and the EV priority switch by the gear stick activated to keep the car wedded to milk float style mobility. That obviously means you'd consume no fuel and emit zero emissions on your journey. The second scenario, though, is very different. Here, you've exhausted the electric-only range this car can give you, WLTP rated at 28 miles for combined use and 35 miles for city driving, but in our experience, a figure somewhere in the, early 20s. Anyway, in this scenario, you're very late for an appointment or maybe for the school run, and you've a long section of empty cross-country motoring to complete to catch up time. In that situation, pushing the petrol engine to its maximum, you might be lucky to see 30 miles to the gallon. What it all boils down to is that your actual returns with this Outlander PHEV will end up pitching themselves somewhere between these two extremes and will be heavily influenced by your lifestyle and the way you drive the car. If your motoring life is mainly made up of short journeys and you don't want the sort of range anxiety you get in the kind of Nissan Leaf-style all-electric car that in typical driving would probably grind to a halt after about 80 miles, then this plug-in Mitsubishi might well offer a perfect solution. You'll certainly be a virtual stranger at your local filling station. If, though, like some business buyers, you spend your life covering long distances on major roads and highways, the truth is that an Outlander with a conventional 2-litre petrol unit might ultimately prove to be a cleaner and more frugal choice. For comparison, Mitsubishi quotes that ordinary 2-litre petrol variant as being able to deliver 37.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 171 grams per kilometre of CO2. For us, though, as for so many potential Outlander owners, the PHEV version's technology benefits remain compelling. If all you cover each day is a typical school run or commuting distance, you might never have to fuel the thing. And if you do have to venture further afield, there's a claimed cruising range of around 540 miles using both battery and petrol modes. We should point out that this figure is quite a bit less than you get with a conventional petrol Outlander, something partly due to the fact that this PHEV model's 45-litre fuel tank is 15 litres smaller. Still, if as a driver you're able to maximise what you do have, it should be sufficient for most family needs. The extent to which that'll be possible will depend upon the success you have in getting the best from all the various bits of technology provided. We'll start with this Eco Mode button on the dash, a function that focuses all of the car's systems on maximum frugality, limiting, for example, the energy drain from the air conditioner. Then there's this useful Save Charge button by the gear stick. Use it to activate the save function and you'll conserve the car's electric charge until you want to activate it. So if your journey starts with a motorway run that would inefficiently use your stored electric charge, you can save that capability until you're able to get more from it, say in the kind of urban driving that you might have to do at the end of the trip. If alternatively you activate the same button to select the charge function, then on the move, or even while stationary, the car will be able to use its petrol engine to proactively recharge the hybrid system's electrical elements as you drive. To be frank though, in our experience, the extra fuel that you tend to use doing this tends to cancel out the battery benefits. A more proactive way of maximising your all-electric driving range is to make as much use as you can of regenerative braking. This is a process that charges the battery as you move by recycling energy you'd otherwise lose when you slow the car down. You can increase that braking regeneration and therefore up the energy harvested and maintain your battery charge for longer in two ways. First, by pushing this auto gear lever into its right-hand B setting, and second, by using these steering wheel paddles, which allow you to either increase or decrease the regenerative effect. Now, I know it sounds quite complicated, but actually after a few weeks of living with this car, it all becomes quite second nature. The extent to which you can charge this Mitsubishi up from the mains is also obviously going to make quite a difference to your overall running costs. Doing so inevitably takes a lot less time than it would in a comparable full electric car, say that Nissan Leaf model that I mentioned, or maybe something like a Volkswagen e-Golf. That's because the 13.8 kWh battery of this plug-in hybrid model is much smaller. The car provides two charging sockets. The main one is the smaller left-hand socket that you'll be using working in conjunction with the provided black charging lead with its 3-pin plug. Using that to power this Mitsubishi up from an ordinary household 13-amp domestic socket would take 5 hours, half an hour longer than the previous 2-litre PHEV model needed. But if you're out and about and can find a 16-amp public charging point, that time will reduce to 3.5 hours. That's the kind of charge time that you can expect if you install a wall box in your garage, something your Mitsubishi dealer can arrange for you via the brand's partnership with ChargeMaster and PodPoint. I said there were two charging sockets provided on the Outlander PHEV. The second right-hand larger one is for so-called CHAdeMO rapid charging and works with the many rapid charging points springing up around the country and available at many Mitsubishi dealerships. Such a charge point will often already have a charging lead. All you need to do is plug it into the car's CHAdeMO socket. However, a second orange CHAdeMO charging lead is also provided with the car in case you need it. Now, once you've plugged into a rapid charger, you'll be able to replenish your batteries up from 0 to 80% in just 25 minutes. To use a public charging point, you'll need to get yourself a swipe card from your local council, which may or may not include the parking fee and the electricity you'll be using. Back at home, the price of that electricity will also, of course, be another influencing cost factor. If you've opted for a trim level that gives you Mitsubishi's remote control app, you'll be able to set charging times to take advantage of cheaper night electricity rates. Plus, via the app, you'll be able to preset the climate control to reach a certain temperature at a predetermined point. This will mean that in the height of winter or in summer, you won't have to draw heavily from the battery in warming or cooling the car once you start off. There are other win-win scenarios for PHEV motoring too, if your comparison is with ordinary diesel or petrol power. The biggest one being the benefit-in-kind tax savings for company buyers that we alluded to earlier. Those unlikely sounding official fuel and CO2 figures that I quoted at the beginning may realistically be pie in the sky, but the important thing is that the government believes them. Which is why, as you'll probably already know, hybrids, and particularly plug-in hybrids, attract a much lower benefit-in-kind company car tax rating than diesels. In the case of the Outlander PHEV model, you'll pay a BIK rate of just 13%, which will see a 40% taxpayer having to fund monthly taxation in the £160 to £200 bracket, depending on the trim variant that you've chosen. That's massively different to the amount you'd have to give the Chancellor were you to choose a comparable diesel-engined SUV of this kind. To give you some perspective on that, we'll tell you that for a 40% taxpayer, the 4H version of this car would attract an annual taxation bill of £2,049. For a comparable Audi Q5 2-litre TDI 190 PS S-Line Plus model, which has a BIK rating of 34%, the annual taxation bill would be £5,651. So if you were to go for the Mitsubishi over the Audi, that would equate to a first-year saving of £3,603 and a massive 3-year saving of £11,499. Makes you think, doesn't it? And of course, that's just taking into account BIK taxation. Add in all the other savings that you could make on fuel purchases, vehicle excise duty and congestion charging, and your total savings figure could rise much further. Mitsubishi reckons that an average owner with a 20-mile each-day daily commute who does around 18,000 miles a year, pays company car tax and is switching from a typical 40 miles to the gallon diesel SUV could save themselves over £5,000 a year by switching into an Outlander PHEV. That's a hard stat to ignore. What else might you need to know? Well, bear in mind that the top 4HS, 5H and 5HS trim levels will be subjected to the government's tax levy for models costing over £40,000 to buy. That was the case at the launch of this revised model in mid-2018 anyway. That levy stands at £450 a year for the first 5 years of ownership. On to insurance, which is reasonably rated at Group 27E for the base Duro model and Group 31A for the plusher 4H and 5H variants. Go for the 4HS version that we're trying here, a derivative with extra camera-driven safety equipment, and the rating drops to Group 26E or Group 27E if you go for the 5HS derivative. Residual values aren't too bad either. Independent experts reckoning that after the usual industry standard 3-year, 60,000 mile ownership period, this Outlander PHEV should still be worth 36.4% of its original asking price. That's if you're looking at it in the 4HS form that we're testing here. Another thing you might be encouraged by as a potential buyer is the decently long 5-year warranty, though that's slightly spoiled by the brand's insistence on limiting it to 62,500 miles. As you'd expect in this day and age, there's a 12-year anti-perforation warranty and 3 years of pan-European roadside assistance and home start are included in the price. Servicing is required every year or 12,500 miles, whichever comes first, and you can keep maintenance costs down by purchasing a decent value prepaid servicing pack, which takes care of the cost of garage visits for 3 years or 36,000 miles. The pack costs £450 and Mitsubishi says that over 90% of its customers purchase it. There really ought to be more competition for this car by now. As it is, most of this Outlander PHEV model's rivals still campaign primarily with smoky diesel power, which will be no good to you if you're seriously troubled by questions of company car taxation and forthcoming emissions legislation. Rival premium brands have this technology, but they struggle to bring it to market for the kind of money that Mitsubishi is asking here. Of course, since the abolition of the government's plug-in car grant, this Outlander PHEV no longer looks quite as affordable as it once did. But it still makes sense against a premium badge D-segment SUV rival. Or at least it does in this revised form with its slightly smarter styling and improved cabin quality. The changes made to the hybrid engineering are welcome too, though they don't really change the appeal of this car to any meaningful extent. You'd still be unlikely to choose one of these if you prioritised driving dynamics, badge equity, or the ultimate in slush-moulded cabin luxury in an SUV of this kind. All of which is fine because typical Outlander PHEV buyers don't. They realise that rivals able to better this Mitsubishi in those areas are usually limited by yesterday's technology. This car, though, has been engineered for a different era. If you've never thought much of electric mobility as an automotive solution, we think it might still have the power to convert you.